Hello, everyone. So, as mentioned, my name is Kasper. So, in addition to being a senior technical advisor, I'm also a software engineer. I've been a developer advocate before, so it's a commonality there. And I've been an open source maintainer for about 25 years. 25 years, I've been contributing to open source about that long. And this is really important because it means that I understand, I hope this is my clicker right there. It means that I understand a lot of the open source ecosystem, right? You probably all know this. I'm speaking to like-minded people, but we are massive consumers of open source software in the government. The single largest consumer of open source software in the world is the US federal government, mostly because we have hundreds of thousands of different IT programs. But more importantly than that, I think, is that nearly any singular IT system is almost entirely open source software. Think about it. Your operating system, what is it? Red Hat Linux? Maybe it's Debian, maybe it's something else. Think about your programming language. Is it Python? Is it Go? Is it Rust? Guess what? Those are all Java. Those are all on open source. You're using them with JDK, aren't you? Right? Everything is built on open source. And we have these extremely high security requirements. Right? Anyone here that's worked in federal space, you know we have these high security requirements. So we just pull in random Go framework and pull it into our library from the by the minute, right? No, we can't do that. But in fact, that is what we do. We have this high public interest in our work. Everyone has the eyes on us. You heard the story about healthcare in India. That code isn't the problem. It's everything down below that, right? Okay, so what are we going to do about it? We're going to talk a little bit about open source at DHS, and we're going to talk about policy. Back up slightly because somehow I think you mentioned already, the federal source code policy, OMB memo N-16-21, put out in 2016, established a lot of the foundations of what modern open source policy in federal agencies looks like. Shortly after that, there were a couple of different efforts. One that I was participating in when I was at DoD under the guys at the US Digital Service. We developed an open source policy. I wrote it in 2018. It got signed last year. That's fine. Oh no, last year, sorry, 2024. It got signed in 22. So that's fine, 4 years to sign up them all. And then we get to DHS policy. This one's also been around for a number of years, about 4 years, but we made a big revision to it. I was one of the primary authors of that revision. In particular, it sets out a lot more information and requires a lot more guidance on how we select, how we consume, and how we publish open source software. The consume is really, really important here. You're going to hear a little bit from CISA in a bit, I think, about some of those practices, but we have to safely and securely consume and ingest open source libraries. It also talks a lot about guidance for contributing upstream to these projects. You might say, well, why do we need to contribute upstream? Well, it's actually really important, and that's why I wrote it into the DoD policy, and why I wrote it into the DHS policy, that we as a government should be contributing back to our upstream repositories. Open source supports all critical infrastructure. Any water system, any transportation system, any energy grid, it's all running on open source software. And that rising tide lifts all ships, right? So if we, the government, the biggest consumer of open source, actually contribute back, actually start fixing the security holes in the source project, not just in our level, then everyone will benefit. Everyone, not in the federal agencies, not in the United States, but around the world will benefit from this. And of course, we want to support the projects we rely on, right? We rely on Linux distributions, we rely on things like Python, we rely on the various frameworks that support all our APIs and also our front ends. But we also need help from, I'm guessing, a lot of the other people in this crowd that are not government officials, all the people that are contractors, right? We need you to help, and we, the government, need to be writing this into our contracts. It needs to be a requirement in our contracts that if you, the contractor, fix a bug in an open source library, that has to go back to the source upstream. It has to. It's the only way that we solve this problem, the Nebraska problem that Richie mentioned earlier. I wanted to mention one other thing, or I guess a few other things, that it's not just about us, right? I focus on DHS policy. I focus on internal DHS practices, but you're going to hear from CISA in a minute. And CISA works to secure that ecosystem right large. CISA is part of DHS, and so I work very closely with them. And as you heard from Remy earlier, it's not just within DHS, right? We also have a cross-agency working group, the Open Source Software Security Initiative, OS3I, and we work across agencies to figure out what problems we should be focusing on, what energy we should go to those problems. And then, of course, there's no boundaries, there's no mental international boundaries in terms of source. And so at DHS, we also have the purview of being able to work with the EU Commission on how we can do open source development across government. How can we learn from each other's successes and failures, and how can we develop guidance that works for them. That's it. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time.